I never thought the happiest day of my life would turn into the moment my whole world shattered. My mom kicked me out of the house on my graduation day. And to make it worse, she gave my room to my sister, her golden girl. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Tessa Lane. I was 18, finally graduating high school. That morning, I woke up excited. I had my cap and gown laid out, and I couldn't wait to see my mom smiling in the crowd. For years, I had worked so hard, hoping she would be proud of me. My little sister Mara still had 2 years of school left, and Mom always treated her like a princess. But I didn't mind much. I thought one day, she'd see I was trying my best too. After the ceremony, I looked around for my mom. Everyone else was hugging their families, taking pictures, and laughing. I waited and waited, holding my diploma tight. Finally, I saw her car parked nearby. I ran toward it, still smiling. But when I opened the door, she didn't even look at me. She just said, "We need to talk when we get home." My stomach dropped. The ride was silent. When we got to the house, I noticed something strange. Boxes in the hallway, my door half open, my posters gone. My mom stood there with her arms crossed. "Tessa," she said coldly, "you're grown now. Mara needs her own space. It's time for you to move out." At first, I laughed, thinking she was joking. But then I saw Mara standing behind her, holding my old pillow. My bed had already been taken apart. My clothes were shoved into garbage bags. "You're serious?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Today of all days?" Mom just shrugged. "You'll figure it out. You're an adult now." Mara smirked from behind her, that smug little grin she always had when she got what she wanted. "Guess it's my room now," she said, almost singing the words. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, cry, beg, anything. But instead, I just grabbed my bag, my diploma, and walked out. The air outside felt heavy, like the world was closing in on me. I sat in my car for hours, staring at my hands. The same hands that had helped Mom pay bills, wash dishes, take care of Mara when she was sick. None of it mattered. I was disposable. That night, I slept in my car behind the diner where I used to work weekend. The seat was cold and uncomfortable, but it was better than going back. I kept thinking about how everything had changed in just one day. The girl who dreamed of her mom's pride now had no home, no family, and nowhere to go. Still, deep inside, a small voice whispered that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a different story, one where I'd learned to live without needing anyone's approval, not even my mother's. The walk home after graduation felt long, but Tessa's heart was light. She pictured balloons tied to the porch, maybe a cake on the kitchen counter, and her mom waiting with a proud smile. She had dreamed about that moment for years. Her shoes clicked on the sidewalk as she hurried up the driveway, still holding her rolled-up diploma. When she opened the front door, silence greeted her. The house was still, almost too still. No laughter, no decorations, no sign of celebration. The living room looked the same as always, except emptier somehow. No one called her name. No one said congratulations. The smell of cleaning supplies hung in the air instead of the scent of food or candles. She stepped farther inside and called softly, "Mom?" Her voice echoed. A faint sound came from down the hall. Tessa followed it, her heart sinking with every step. When she reached her bedroom door, she froze. The walls were half-painted a pale pink, and boxes labeled Mara's room were stacked by the closet. Her posters were gone, her bed stripped, and her drawers stood open and empty. Her mom turned around with a paintbrush in hand, barely glancing at her. "Oh, you're back," she said in a flat tone. "Perfect timing. We're redoing this room for Mara. You can start packing your things from the hallway." Tessa blinked, thinking she misheard. "What do you mean redoing it for Mara? This is my room." Her mom sighed, setting the brush down. "Tessa, you're an adult now. Time to make space for people who matter." The words hit harder than a slap. There was no warmth in her voice, no hint of emotion, just cold finality. Tessa stood frozen, her throat tightening. She wanted to ask why, to remind her mom that she had worked evenings at the grocery store, using most of her paycheck to help with rent and bills. But the words stuck in her chest. She had done it all hoping to ease her mother's burden, never realizing she was only buying time in a house that didn't truly feel like home. She glanced around at the piles of Mara's belongings. The vanity table she'd helped build for her sister now stood where her desk used to be. The pink comforter lay spread across what had once been her bed. Every trace of her life was being covered up, replaced by her sister's world. "Where am I supposed to go?" she finally whispered. Her mom shrugged. "You'll figure it out. You're independent now." She turned back to painting, dismissing her like she was nothing more than an inconvenience. Tessa's chest ached as she stepped backward, her eyes stinging. The sound of the brush scraping the wall followed her down the hallway, replacing what should have been cheers and laughter. The house that once held her childhood now felt like a stranger's place. And standing there, With her graduation gown still in her hands, she realized the celebration she had imagined never existed at all. Tessa stood in the doorway of what used to be her room, her chest tightening as she watched her mother roll a fresh coat of pink over the last bit of blue that had once been hers. The smell of paint mixed with the bitterness in the air. Darlene didn't look up when she said, almost casually, "You have until tonight to pack your things." The words hit like a brick. "Tonight?" Tessa's voice cracked. "You can't be serious. Where am I supposed to go?" Her mother finally turned, arms crossed. Her expression was calm, too calm. "Mara needs her own space. You're old enough to handle life." She said it as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. Tessa felt her stomach twist. "Mom, I just graduated today," she whispered. "I haven't even figured anything out yet." But Darlene only gave a short, tired sigh. "You'll manage. You've always been the responsible one." Before Tessa could say anything more, Mara stepped into the doorway, leaning against the frame with her phone in hand. Her smirk was sharp. "Guess you should have been the favorite," she said with a mocking tone that made Tessa's eyes burn. Tessa turned toward her, but Darlene cut in sharply. "Don't start drama, Tessa. You've had your time here." The finality in her voice left no room for pleading. With shaking hands, Tessa grabbed the few bags she could find and began stuffing in her clothes, her books, the framed picture of her and her best friend, and the small stuffed bear she'd had since childhood. The house felt colder with every trip back and forth to the hallway. No one offered to help. No one said a word. When she walked past the living room, Mara was already sitting on the couch, flipping through TV channels as if nothing was happening. Darlene was at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. Neither of them looked up. Tessa stopped for a moment, diploma clutched against her chest. She wanted to say something, anything, to make her mother see how cruel this was. But she knew it wouldn't matter. She had already been replaced. Outside, the evening air was heavy with humidity. The sun was setting, throwing gold across the driveway as Tessa placed her duffel bag in the back seat of her old car. She stared at the front door one last time, hoping maybe it would open, maybe someone would call her back. It stayed shut. She got in, turned the key, and drove off with no plan, no money, and nowhere to go. The streetlights blurred through her tears as she headed toward the only place she could think of, the back of the diner where she used to work weekends. That night, the world felt too big and too empty. She curled up in the back seat, her diploma beside her, the same piece of paper she once thought would change her life. Now it was the only thing she had left. The first few weeks were the hardest. Tessa woke each morning stiff from sleeping in her car, brushing her hair in gas station mirrors, eating cheap sandwiches she could barely afford. She spent her days walking around town, asking every store for work. Most turned her away with polite smiles, saying they weren't hiring. By the second week, she was down to her last few dollars. One hot afternoon, she wandered into a small mechanic shop at the edge of town. The sign above the door read Harvey's Auto Repair, its paint peeling with age. Inside, the smell of oil and metal filled the air. Behind the counter stood an older man with gray hair and kind eyes. He looked up when she entered. "You look like you could use a job," he said with a half smile. Tessa nodded quickly. "I can clean, help customers, anything you need. I just need a chance." Harvey studied her for a moment, then handed her a rag. "You know how to change oil?" "A little," she said honestly. "Well," he said, "you'll learn more here. Grab an apron." That was the beginning of something new. The first few days were exhausting. Her hands ached from scrubbing floors, and her arms were covered in grease. But for the first time in a long while, she felt useful. Harvey wasn't like the people she'd left behind. He didn't ask about her past. He just showed her how to do things right and paid her fairly every Friday. Within a month, she saved enough to rent a small studio apartment above a bakery. It was barely more than one room with cracked walls and a leaky faucet, but it was hers. Each night, she would sit by the window, watching the lights outside, feeling a quiet pride that she hadn't felt in years. She tried calling her mother a few times, hoping maybe things had softened between them. Every call went unanswered. Weeks turned into months, and she stopped trying. Then one evening, her phone finally rang. Her mother's name flashed on the screen. For a brief moment, Tessa felt hope. She answered quickly. "Mom." Darlene's voice was cold. "You've got a job now, right?" Tessa hesitated. "Yeah, I do." "Good," her mother replied sharply. "You owe me for everything I did for you. Send me something. I raised you. Now it's time to pay me back." The words stung more than she expected. She realized her mother wasn't calling out of love or worry, only out of need. It hit her like a final truth. She had never been seen as a daughter, just a convenience. After that call, she sat quietly on her small bed, staring at the floor. The hurt was sharp, but beneath it, something else started to grow, a calm determination. If her mother saw her as nothing more than a tool, then she'd prove she could build a life without her. She promised herself that from then on, every drop of effort would go toward her own future, not anyone else's. For years passed like pages in a worn-out book, filled with long days, hard work, and small victories. Tessa's life looked nothing like the one she'd left behind. The girl who once slept in her car now stood beneath the bright sign of her own business, Lane's Auto Garage, the name painted proudly across the front. The place wasn't fancy, but it was hers. Every dented tool, every oil stain, every satisfied customer reminded her of how far she'd come. She had learned everything she knew from Harvey, who had become more than just a boss. He was the steady voice that pushed her forward when things got tough. When he decided to retire, he handed her the keys to the shop, saying simply, "You've earned it, kid." From that moment, her world shifted. She poured every ounce of energy into keeping the place alive, and soon her name became known around town for honesty and good work. Tessa's confidence grew with every repair she finished and every check she signed with her own name. She no longer felt the ache of being unwanted. Her life was small, peaceful, and steady. For the first time, she could breathe without waiting for something to be taken from her. Then one afternoon, her phone rang. The number looked familiar in a way that made her stomach twist. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. When she picked up, a shaky voice came through the line. "Tessa, it's your mother." The silence stretched before she replied. "What do you need, Mom?" Darlene sighed heavily. "It's been hard. My boyfriend left, and things aren't good here." Her voice broke a little, but it sounded more desperate than sad. "We're losing the house. And Mara, well, she dropped out of college. She's been struggling." Tessa leaned against the counter, gripping the phone tighter. The sounds of the shop hummed around her, tools clinking, a radio playing softly, but all she could hear was the faint echo of her mother's voice. "I see," she said quietly. Darlene continued. "We just need a place for a while. Until we figure things out. You have room, don't you?" The question hung heavy in the air. Tessa looked around at her life, the one she had built from nothing. Every inch of it was earned without her mother's help. The same woman who had once thrown her out now needed her. "I'll think about it," Tessa said finally, her voice calm but distant. When she hung up, she stood there for a long time, her thoughts tangled. The pain from years ago still lived deep inside her, but there was no anger left, only a strange quiet. The tables had turned. The woman who once told her to handle life alone was now the one reaching out for help. And Tessa, stronger than ever, realized she held the power to decide what came next. Tessa stood near the front of her shop, wiping her hands on a rag as the sound of an old car pulled into the lot. The moment she saw the familiar figure step out, her stomach tightened. She hadn't seen her mother in 4 years, but some things never changed. The sharp way Darlene carried herself, the same judgmental eyes that could slice through silence. Behind her, Mara followed, arms crossed, wearing a look that mixed boredom with irritation. Tessa had almost canceled the meeting a dozen times that morning. Every part of her told her it was a mistake, but curiosity had won. She wanted to see them, to understand why after all this time they had come back. Darlene looked around the garage, unimpressed. "So this is where you work," she said, her tone flat. "I thought it'd be bigger." Tessa took a slow breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "It's enough for me," she said evenly. "What did you want to talk about?" Her mother hesitated before speaking, glancing toward Mara. "We've had a rough couple of months. You already know about the house. We just need a place to stay for a bit, until we get back on our feet." She said it as if she were asking for a small favor, her eyes already scanning the shop as though deciding which room she'd claim. Tessa felt the air grow heavy. The old pain tried to surface, but she pushed it down. "There's a motel down the street," she said calmly. "Maybe they'll have a room available." Darlene blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean? You have space here, don't you?" Tessa didn't flinch. "I have space for my work, not for guests." For a moment, the room was quiet except for the hum of the ceiling fan. Then Mara let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. "Wow, you think you're better than us now, don't you?" Tessa looked at her sister, her voice steady. "No, I just remember how easily you replaced me." The words hung in the air, cutting through whatever false confidence her mother and sister had brought with. Darlene's mouth opened, but no words came. Mara's smirk faded, replaced by a flush of embarrassment. Tessa walked toward the open garage door, signaling that the conversation was over. The afternoon light spilled in, bright and warm, touching the same floor she had once swept as a desperate teenager. Now, she stood there as a woman who had built everything with her own hand. Darlene muttered something under her breath, but Tessa didn't listen. She heard the sound of the car door slam, then the engine fading as they drove away. The silence that followed wasn't painful, it was peaceful. For the first time, she realized she didn't need to prove anything. The girl they had cast aside was gone, and in her place stood someone who had learned that strength doesn't come from being loved, it comes from surviving without it. The night settled quietly over the town, and the shop lights had long been turned off. Tessa sat at her small kitchen table, sipping tea and staring at the faint glow of the city through her window. The day had been long, and she thought it was finally over, until she heard a knock at the door. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was a delivery to the wrong address. But the knocking grew louder, uneven, desperate. When she opened the door, her mother stood there. Darlene's eyes were red, her face streaked with tears, her clothes wrinkled as if she hadn't slept. For a moment, Tessa just froze. The woman before her didn't look powerful or sharp. She looked small and frightened. "Please, Tessa," Darlene cried, voice trembling. "I didn't know where else to go. We have nowhere. Mara's staying with a friend for now, and she broke off, covering her face. "I'm sorry for how things turned out. I just need a little help." Tessa's chest tightened. Part of her wanted to turn her away without a word, but another part, the part that still remembered being a daughter, hesitated. She stepped aside slightly, unsure if she was doing the right thing. "You should sit down," she said quietly. Darlene came inside, glancing around the small apartment. Her gaze landed on the framed photo of the garage hanging by the door, and for a second, her expression changed. The tears slowed, and something cold flickered in her eyes. "You've done well for yourself," she said softly, wiping her face. Tessa didn't respond. She just stood there, waiting. Darlene turned toward her, voice sharpening. "You owe me this, Tessa." The words came out of nowhere, cutting through the fragile silence. The warmth that had begun to form inside Tessa vanished in an instant. She stared at her mother, disbelief spreading through her. "I owe you," she asked quietly. Darlene lifted her chin. "I raised you, didn't I? Fed you, clothed you. I gave you everything I could, and now, when I need help, you act like a stranger." Something inside Tessa broke. Not in the way it had years ago when she was thrown out, but in a deeper, final way. The tears she'd once held back never came. Instead, a calm clarity filled her chest. She saw it now, the same manipulation, the same selfishness hiding behind every tear. Nothing had changed. The woman standing in front of her wasn't sorry. She was cornered. Tessa took a step back and opened the door again. The cool night air drifted in, brushing against her face. "You should go, Mom," she said softly. "You'll find somewhere." Darlene's expression twisted, caught between anger and disbelief, but she didn't argue. She turned and walked into the darkness, her sobs fading down the street. Tessa stood there for a long time, the open door framing the empty road. Then she closed it gently, locking it behind her, not out of fear but finality. The hope she had carried for years slipped away, leaving behind something purer, peace. The news about the house came to Tessa one morning through a neighbor who used to live down the street from where she grew up. The bank had taken possession after months of unpaid mortgage. The place that once felt like a prison to her was now an empty shell, listed for auction. When she heard, she sat quietly for a long time, remembering the nights she'd cried on that porch, the words her mother had thrown at her, the silence that had followed. She didn't feel anger anymore, only a strange calm curiosity. A week later, she stood at the county courthouse among a small crowd of bidders. Her hands were steady, her expression unreadable. The auctioneer's voice echoed through the room, fast and rhythmic. The house went up, numbers climbed, and when the final call came, Tessa raised her paddle. The gavel struck, and just like that, the house belonged to her. It wasn't revenge that drove her, it was something quieter. A need to reclaim what had once been used to hurt her, to turn the place of her pain into something that could finally belong to her on her own terms. She drove there that afternoon. The yard was overgrown, the windows clouded with dust, the porch sagging slightly. Yet when she stepped inside, the air felt lighter than she remembered. The rooms were bare, empty of laughter, empty of cruelty. For the first time, she could walk through the hallway without feeling small. She opened her old bedroom door and saw nothing but sunlight spilling across the floorboard. She smiled softly. It didn't take long for her mother to find out. Tessa was at the garage when her phone rang, the number unfamiliar, but the voice instantly recognizable. "You stole my house," Darlene screamed. "How could you do this to your own family?" Tessa's grip on the phone didn't tighten. Her voice was even quiet. "No, Mom," she said. "I didn't steal it. I bought the house you threw me out of. It's mine now." There was a long silence on the other end. Then came the sound of angry breathing, muttered words she couldn't quite make out, and the sharp click of disconnection. Later that week, Darlene showed up in person, Mara trailing behind her. They stood at the end of the driveway while Tessa painted the porch railing. Her mother's voice was shrill, cracking from anger. "You think this makes you better than me?" Tessa didn't stop painting. "No," she said quietly. "It just means it's finally over." Mara didn't speak. She looked from her mother to Tessa, her face pale and unreadable. Then she tugged at Darlene's sleeve, whispering something too low to hear. Darlene's face twisted with rage, but when Tessa met her eyes, she looked away. Without another word, she turned and walked off, Mara following. As their figures disappeared down the street, Tessa stood on the porch, brush in hand, feeling a peace she had never known before. The house no longer belonged to the past, it belonged to her. The renovation began quietly, without an announcement or plan to rush. Tessa spent her evenings at the house after closing the garage, sanding walls, patching cracks, and repainting each room with her own colors. The sound of her tools filled the empty spaces where shouting and silence once lived. Every stroke of paint, every repaired floorboard felt like closing an old wound. The house that had once pushed her out was slowly becoming her sanctuary. Her old bedroom, the one that had been taken from her years ago, was now transformed. She replaced the faded wallpaper with clean white paint and brought in a sturdy desk she built herself. On the wall above it, she hung her framed diploma, the same one she had carried in her hands that night she left. It gleamed softly in the afternoon light, a quiet reminder that she had made it without anyone's permission. A small plaque with her business name rested on the shelf, a symbol of everything she had created from nothing. One afternoon, while she was assembling a bookshelf, a familiar rumble of an old pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Harvey climbed out, his steps slow but steady. His hair had grown whiter since the last time she saw him, but his smile hadn't changed. "You've done something special here," he said, looking around at the freshly painted porch and trimmed hedges. Tessa wiped her hands on a cloth and smiled. "It's strange. It doesn't even feel like the same place." He nodded, stepping inside. The scent of new wood and paint lingered in the air. "That's because it isn't," he said gently. "You changed it. You gave it your meaning." His eyes landed on the diploma hanging neatly above the desk. "Sometimes family isn't who raised you, it's who stands by you." The words sank deep into her chest, settling there with a warmth she hadn't felt in years. She knew he was right. The man who had offered her a chance, who had trusted her when she had nothing, had become the closest thing to a father she ever had. After he left, she walked through the quiet rooms, touching the smooth edges of the door frames and the cool glass of the windows. The ache that used to live in these walls was gone. In its place was peace, the kind that came not from forgetting, but from forgiving life itself. A few days later, she drove to the small apartment where her mother now lived. Darlene opened the door, her face older, her voice weaker. They stood in silence for a moment before Tessa spoke softly. "I came to say goodbye." Her mother didn't answer. She only nodded, eyes glancing away. Tessa didn't wait for anything more. She turned, walked down the steps, and didn't look back. As she drove away, the setting sun washed the road in gold, and for the first time, the weight of the past lifted completely. The day wound down slowly, the sky painted in soft streaks of orange and gold. Tessa stood outside her garage, wiping the last bit of grease from her hands as the final customer drove away. The hum of the engine faded into the distance, leaving behind the quiet rhythm of evening. She turned off the lights one by one, the familiar click echoing through the space that had become her second home. The smell of oil and metal still lingered, but it was comforting now, not heavy like before. She stepped outside, locking the door, and leaned against her car. The metal was warm beneath her fingers, still holding the heat of the day. Across the street, the sun dipped lower, its light catching the edge of her sign, Lane's Auto Garage, and making the letters glow faintly. For a moment, she let herself breathe it all in, the calm, the stillness, the simple truth that she had made it. Her voice, quiet but steady, filled the air as if she were speaking to her younger self. "Being kicked out was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and the best," she said softly. "It taught me that love isn't about blood. It's about respect." The words carried no anger, only clarity. She could still remember every moment of pain, every night she'd spent wondering if she'd ever feel whole again. But now the memories no longer hurt. They had become part of her strength. She glanced toward the horizon, the sun melting into the hills, and continued. "And sometimes the best revenge is living the life they never believed you could." Her reflection shimmered faintly in the car door beside her. She barely recognized the girl she once was, the one who stood outside a house she no longer belonged to, clutching a diploma and shaking with fear. That girl had built something solid from the pieces left behind. She hadn't needed anyone to rescue her. She had done it herself. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the faint scent of flowers from somewhere nearby. She smiled at the thought of Harvey, at the lessons he had given her, at the kindness that had filled the space where family should have been. He had shown her that not all people take. They give quietly, without asking for anything in return. Tessa took one last look at the sunset, the colors fading into twilight. She slipped her keys into her pocket and walked toward her car. As the door closed behind her, she caught a glimpse of herself in the rearview mirror, calm, sure, and free. The engine started with a low hum, and she drove off slowly, the golden light reflecting across the hood. The road ahead stretched wide and open, carrying her toward a future untouched by bitterness. The house was hers, the business was hers, and most importantly, her peace was hers. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running away from anything. She was simply moving forward. Hey besties, thanks for staying till the end of this journey with Tessa. Life can be cruel, but sometimes the worst heartbreaks lead us to our greatest strength. She lost her home, her family's love, and still built everything from the ground up. That's real power. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, leave a comment, and subscribe for more emotional stories. See you in the next one. Bye!